I'm Jonathan Whistler, CEO of EdgeNext, broadcasting from EdgeNext Studios here in Amsterdam. Very excited to kick off one of many webinars from the Smart Building Revolution. Very happy to have Nicholas and Sophie here joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Nicholas White. I'm co-founder of the Smart Building Collective, and we're working with EdgeNext and all of you to bring the building revolution, which is just a content series on the future of real estate. And we're excited to have our first guest today, Sophie. So nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, very nice to meet all of you. My name is Sophie Schuler. I lead our scientific research and insights group in the office consulting team at Cushman & Wakefield, and I'm a PhD researcher looking at the impact of workplace design in the built environment on neurophysiology.
Yeah, we're excited to be here. The Building Revolution is really a platform. It's an event series. It's a platform. It's making sure that we're bringing all of the thought-leading content that's happening in the world out to the masses. I think what's really interesting right now is that we're seeing multiple crises converge at the same time, right? We're seeing the environmental crisis, if you're talking about sustainability and the energy crisis that's happening right now, which has brought on this entire ESG world of in real estate, looking at how can we actually start reporting on sustainability and start improving it in many ways. The other crises that we're seeing at the same time is back to work, right? Companies thinking about how can we actually get people to want to come to our offices? Is that needed? Do we have real estate that does that right? Do we have real estate that is still trying to find that? So we're really looking at that. And then, what is the future of real estate? Really, what is the business model behind it? How can we actually make things useful for the market? So we're excited to be here and to have you as our first guest, because EdgeNext and Smart Building Collective are forging this path together, and we're excited to learn from you and hear about your research and have these discussions together.
Yeah, I'm grateful to be here and to be invited back. So thank you both for having me on this very exciting topic.
I think we should start with the current ESG climate, the current energy crisis. What are we seeing in regards to how buildings are being operated in this space? We'll start with you on that topic.
Yeah, Nicholas. I mean, we have a smart building platform, so we can measure energy, we can measure environmental wellness, so air quality, light, temperature, sound, and we also measure occupancy. So we can take all that data together to what we say, utilization drives operations to help people reduce their energy consumption and their costs ultimately. And I have to say, given the recent events over the last 12 months, there's a lot more elevated interest in how do we reduce our energy costs. And then the other driving factor is the EU taxonomy and just ESG reporting in general. So the interest has elevated quite a bit in the last 12 months. I have to say, though, there are still some barriers, and I'm still a bit shocked that people aren't taking this more urgently. Yeah. And then some examples we see, so typically we'll integrate into a building management system and we start to get the data within the first 30 to 60, sometimes 90 days. We see massive amounts of energy wastage. One of the key things we see, and this was a client, the building was about 2 years old, relatively smart compared to most of the buildings in the market. One of the top facilities management teams, and we discovered that about 40% of their energy consumption, 40% of their energy consumption was during non-business hours. So essentially no one in the office and consuming heating, lighting, cooling. It was ridiculous, to be honest. We see these things happening. Another one is, these buildings need to be commissioned initially. They need to be recommissioned over and over again. Yeah. So typically we'll go in and in the first 30 to 60 days, there's typically an error in the commissioning and we can reduce their energy consumption easily by 5%. No changes to the team, no changes to the technology. It's just finding those insights and making those recommendations. Simple, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Implementing that is very complex. So one of the challenges in smart buildings is, it impacts HR and employee experience. It impacts facilities management. The CFO has a stake in there about the real estate footprint and the reporting. So we have to align all these stakeholders. We need network access as well. IT is involved. So that's one of the big challenges. It's not a technology challenge. It's getting all the stakeholders aligned and saying, okay, we're committed to this. We'll get it done in a timely fashion. So people understand the issue. They want to reduce energy costs. They know they can in a relatively easy manner. But getting all those people together and delivering on that is quite a challenge for us. Yeah.
And so technically speaking, how difficult is it?
Technically, it's very easy. We get a connection to a BMS system with some data points around occupancy, high-level occupancy, some data points around wellness, so the environmental, physical wellness, because you don't want to reduce energy and then have people suffer, especially these days. We want people to come back to work. So actually, we can improve wellness by the monitoring and then also simultaneously reduce energy costs. So the technology is quite straightforward. It's really getting the stakeholders aligned, which is the biggest challenge.
Yeah, and I mean within the Smart Building Collective, in what we're doing in our group of organizations that we work with, there's actually a lot of solutions that do this, and all of them say the same thing. Technically speaking, it's easy to do. It's the organizational side of things. It's the stakeholder map. It's how do you actually get the motivation to do it.
Exactly. And I mean, some of these buildings don't have the most modern BMS systems, but we've worked with some of the industry partners, Honeywell, Schneider Electric, Johnson Controls. We have devices you can install relatively easy, less than 10,000 euros, very secure. They pass financial services security tests. So it's a relatively easy technical implementation.
Yeah.
So in your experience, what's the catalyst that you think that is the converter to unblocking some of the complexities with installing these things?
Yeah, it's a bit of now the silver lining on the energy crisis. So it created a sense of urgency. So we see more demand and more openness to open up the gateways, to find the facility management people to install it. So that's been a real driver of the awareness.
And it's because of the wallet, right? It's because of actually having your financials impacted by this energy crisis that is actually making people move.
It's the wallet and it's also the legislation. So the EU taxonomy, you need to be able to have your assets have a certain level of sustainability. You need to report on that. The reporting needs to be auditable. It can't be some guy filled out a spreadsheet and we think it's accurate. So that's another driving force is the legislation.
Yeah.
Which is starting in January 2023. So it's up and coming. So there's a bit of a scramble of, okay, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
And looking for those solutions.
So you have to get ready in that regard for January 1st.
It's coming very soon, yes. Yeah.
So that's crisis one, right?
Right.
Is sustainability and ESG and taxonomy. And the Building Revolution is an event series that is aimed at unpacking all of these very complex, each one of them is complex in their own right. Bring them all together and you have a cocktail of very complex things going on. And so the Building Revolution is going to be unpacking these. We're going to have an event fully on sustainability, fully on ESG, and bringing experts in to talk about that space. And yeah, I'm really excited about it. So, and then the second crisis, let's talk about that one. And it's awesome to have you here because your research is fascinating. Talking about back to work. What is going on right now with back to work and all the companies in looking at that?
Yeah, and well, so many things. The first thing to kind of contextualize it is I think that we have to stop talking about going back to work because it suggests that we're going to revert to something that we previously had. And that's just not the case. I think by every parametric measurement, we can see that is not wanted, that's not needed, and it's definitely not what we're in the process of creating. So I think redefining this concept of the future of work as opposed to going back to work, from my perspective, is more helpful for all parties involved. That said, a lot of the things that we're now seeing from a trend perspective or from a movement perspective, they're not new things. Remote working is not a new thing. It's not a thing that we just came up with during the pandemic. There were already big movements towards hybrid working, remote roles, more digital collaboration for people that are not face-to-face. So It's not that it's necessarily new. The newness comes from the fact that this is mass and universally adopted. And so in a way, we were talking earlier about kind of the difference between doing an individual study and doing a population study. And for me, like the big element that we're dealing with the future of work is now we're seeing these requests and desires and personalities of what it means to be at work coming out on a population level, which is really exciting from a research perspective, but incredibly complex from a commercial and operational perspective, because somehow we've got to organize these things. But the biggest ones for me post-pandemic is this concept of health essential to everything. And I always say whenever Jonathan and I talk about sustainability, what's good for the planetary health is good for human health. You know, if you install effective air quality monitors in offices that are going to utilize less energy consumption, that's still really good if I'm breathing in higher quality air. That's still going to improve my experience as a human being. And I think one of the things that the pandemic has really given us, if you like, is this appreciation of human fragility. And as a result, putting a greater focus on the fact that we can only be these kind of capitalistic, productive beings if the hardware works. And I think for a lot of people, we're seeing that the hardware doesn't work. And as a result, potentially aspects of the built environment, including workplace, could in fact be hindering or at least not supporting in an effective way biological processes that are necessary for us to be humans at work.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah.
I mean, also, and we see the data, and I was actually in the Zuidas here in Amsterdam, the business district yesterday with a client, and then we visited them in May, and it was really a ghost town in the office, and they have quite a large tower there. I was there yesterday, and it was absolutely buzzing, and they said they are reaching peak capacity on days now, so you see the shift of back to work, but I think there's a huge opportunity, and it's great because it won't be exactly like it was before. And we had this conversation before, you know, not all of us are geared up to say, I come in the office at 9 o'clock, I take a half an hour break and I leave at 6 o'clock and then we all sit in traffic together. That's not how humans work, right? We're all different. People work in finance. You have all these different personas. So this idea of flex that better matches the human nature, I think we'll have a much more productive work environment that's adaptive to the different types of humans you have in an organization, as opposed to the rigid Monday through Friday, 9 to 6 o'clock. But of course, the build environment and how we access and use that build environment has to change.
Yeah.
But I see that as a big opportunity in addition to flexibility for the humans, but more flexibility in the real estate itself. And when I say that, I mean, I think you can actually increase the asset utilization and potentially as a building owner, increase your services and potentially your rents.
I think that's for me, there are three key elements of the kind of 9 to 5 or the breakaway from the 9 to 5. One is the fact that still we see with our beloved friend Elon Musk cancelling hybrid work or cancelling remote work. There is still this increasing disconnect between leaders of organizations and the rest of us. So I think that's one key element that we need to systematically overcome.
And a big range in between what's going on with each of them.
A very big range. The problem being that you have very few people making decisions for the masses.
Yeah.
And for the last few years, we've seen, if you like, a greater shift to employee power of being able to be more selective around, well, I'm not going to work for this organization if I can't do that in a way that fits me and my life and my needs. The economic crisis has a potential to potentially disrail that, and that's a slightly challenging issue. But the other element around returning to work, as you mentioned, is also this concept of asset utilization. So why on earth do we have these highly expensive fixed assets that we use for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and the rest of the time it's just completely empty?
Exactly.
And I think whether that's driven by financial motivations, or it's driven by environmental motivations, or it's driven by motivations of people that have small children and then want to be able to go and do their work later at night because that suits their lifestyle, we have to start readdressing the concepts of work in a way that makes better uses of all of the assets that we've already committed to. And I think that concept, especially in connectivity to sustainability, is going to become increasingly more important for younger generations. And the younger populations that are kind of entering the workforce now, we already see them asking questions in interviews, do you serve meat in the canteen? Or am I going to have to come into the office at all? Or why is there car parking spaces downstairs? Why does the boss have a petrol car are, these things are really important, and it kind of seems like it's throwaway. And I think for a lot of people that are more senior in organizations, they're a step far removed. But these are real life considerations, issues, concerns that are going to affect a very big proportionality of people that are coming to these buildings in the next few years. If not, they're already here.
Yeah, and so it's not only about how is the office changing, how is work changing, how are we being more sustainable. It's how are we changing cities, how are we changing buildings to be more effective and efficient and useful for the people that live and work within them.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think also reflect the natural ecosystem of what it means to be human. That sounds really esoteric, but what I mean by that is, going back to the Google example, those kind of community, all life encompassing campuses, I think they were so successful because from an evolutionary perspective, that's how we live. Like, we want to be in the tribe, and this is your tribe. And when you're in, you're really safe. And I think what we're seeing is the dark side of that, especially when it's attached to work, is that there's this concept of overwork, which comes with a lot of health and well-being and physical health issues. But one of the things that I think what you're talking about in terms of community generation in cities, that has the ability to grow, if you like, our connectivity to community that I think, to be honest, has been really eroded over the last few decades. And if you build these local communities across a city scale or even a sub-regional scale within cities, you go to your dry cleaner and you have a chat. You go to your girl in the morning and you grab your coffee from your place, and you have relationships with these people. And I think cultivating or using the built environment to cultivate greater connectivity to communities like that is essential going forward.
Yeah, and I mean, as a tech person, I'm also really excited about the tech. I know it's not going to solve everything, and ultimately you need tech that hits those human needs, not the other way around.
Right.
But I mean, what we see is really that connection, right? So we've talked to students. What we see in our data is people are coming back to work because they want those really deep social connections that they get with their colleagues, and they build trust and they collaborate. They also like those loose connections. So the dry cleaner at the coffee shop. So really getting those connections is a key part of what we see. And from a build and a technology environment, for me, it goes back to asset utilization. And a good example here in Edge Olympic, here in Amsterdam, is we lease out some of the space. So we have a community group. Some of that space we dedicate to nonprofits. So we do Tech for Good. We've done a few events around there. Some of it is for hire, of course. And not only does it bring more buzz and more excitement into the building, it's also a good services revenue model. So we push up our utilization rate, and then there's a good services model because there'll be catering, they'll book the space. You're already invested in the space. You already have that fixed cost. So any additional event revenue you have there is a pretty high margin. And it is that social energy, and then it builds on itself. Right? So if you go to a place that's absolutely buzzing, you want to go back. And if you said, use a nightclub example, if you went to a nightclub and it was empty, would you go back there? Probably not.
Yeah, exactly.
It's similar in a workspace. If you go to a place and it's just buzzing with your tribe, people interested in the same things you want to do, they have this similar purpose, you'll come back to that space. And that's part of the community we built here. And there's some really basic technology to enable that. So you need to book the space, you need to pay for the space, get the catering. So technology enables it. It doesn't drive it, but it's an enabler for that.
It's never about the technology, right? The technology is it's just a tool.
Yeah, but it can inform it. And that's what I think we're on, like this very interesting and slightly conflicted cusp of the next evolution, if you like, of real estate, which is that we were talking earlier about there's sensor technology now that can monitor kind of how people move through space, but also can detect posturing and phenotypes. So if I'm stood like this, the sensor technology knows I'm making a call. They don't care that it's me, but what that enables us as workplace professionals to do, or real estate professionals, is to start really evaluating, okay, what is really happening in this space? I mean, I can do an observational study, but number one, that's very expensive to do at scale, and it's not particularly objective in some ways. But if we can start using sensoring technology or any type of technology to start really evaluating and informing, okay, what's going on? How can we design appropriate solutions, even from a research perspective, trying to correlate or understand the correlations between human behavior, environmental qualities, how people move through space, the physical design of space, that for me starts to get very interesting. And I think the ability for us to do that is at the forefront of technology.
I think we see a huge variety at the moment of how smart is being adopted and the maturity levels within buildings, all from most basic level of getting a bit of insight into your space and how healthy it is, or how the CO2 levels are and these types of things, versus having a fully integrated smart infrastructure that pushes an invoice after somebody's used a room, right? It's a completely different level of digitization.
Yeah.
And I think that word smart is really interesting. It's kind of coming under fire. Like, it's not about the technology. What the building revolution is about is understanding real estate and how to better position your assets for life and for work. And then, how can we use technology to enhance that?
Yeah. And I think the two parts of that you just touched on, Jonathan, which is there's a physical element with regards to what does the space look like, where is the space, how accessible is the space. But the other element is the activation of that space, the kind of FM element, if you like. And we were talking earlier about FM. My background is in FM, and I absolutely love FM. But it is seen as kind of the stepchild, if you like, of the real estate continuum. At least it used to be the unsexy element, but actually for me it's the most important element, because we can design the most beautiful workspace, but to activate it is something very different. And that's where the value really comes from my perspective. But also going back to what you were saying around the maturity scale, I think a lot of the things that we talk about now in the market, we're really talking about like things that the top 10% of organizations can really afford, or in the luxurious position to be able to implement and consider. And I think you're totally right. There's this huge swathe of organizations that are just trying to, at the moment, get to the bare minimum of just understanding what asset they're sitting in, let alone who's coming in and how that's being used. And I think asset activation, as well as the physical asset and the monitoring of that asset, activation is something that is easier or cheaper, if you like, to be able to implement. So I think that's also a very interesting dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%. And we've had this conversation before about how we can get more data. Then we'll educate how people work, how to optimize buildings, how to optimize connections, and get the most out of people, enable them to be their very best. But there are a couple of challenges there. One of the challenges is privacy. And it's very interesting. We have all these conversations. We actually developed a people counting application that runs in any tablet, so you can deploy it. And we call it sensorless IoT. You already have the tablets there. But there's a huge resistance, right? So people are saying, okay, I don't, it's a very dumb program. It says, okay, you're not a plant, you're not a horse, you're a person. So I can count you as a person, and then we can give the data and say, okay, how are people using the space? How many people, when are they using it? So you can optimize your space and optimize the employee experience. But people are very resistant to that. So we had one deployment, and we had people counting sensors. It looks like a camera. It's not really a camera per se, but people were putting Post-it notes over it. So they were blocking it. And then we have all the security questions about how much data can you get out of these devices. So it's a huge barrier. And at the same time, people are putting these devices in their homes that can listen to what they say and track. So we see this disparity of what I'm willing to give in the workplace versus what I'm willing to do in my personal life. One of the solutions we see there is making that value transparent to the end user, the users of the space. Because in your home, you're used to Google here or Instagram, whatever it is. I give you my data and then I get something in return. I think we need to build that dialogue with the end users in the space. So they say, okay, I'm giving you my data, and then what am I getting in return?
Absolutely.
And I think part of that is making that transparent.
Yeah.
So that's a key part of like, okay, I'm giving my data. How much value will I get, and what kind of value would I get in that transaction, that data transaction?
Actually, what we're talking about is designing spaces that encompass a much broader range of what it means to be human. The big problem for organizations in that context, and architects in a way, is that what we're trying to design for is all the tiny permutations of individuals and their individual needs, which is completely impossible. Organizational theory, modern organizational theory, is geared up to manage groups at the highest level. That's the most efficient use of management time. That's why organizations are a pyramid. You've got one person leading 5 people, leading 25 people, leading 5,000. If we start cultivating like a highly individualistic experience at work and in the workplace, we're never going to be able to manage that. It's going to be an absolute car crash. You can't manage individuals like that. Under the existing pretenses of modern organizations. And this is maybe going a little bit off topic, but again, going back to organizations like Patagonia, they're organizing themselves around a product and a vision and a culture. And if you like, the culture is the glue that sticks people together when there isn't a process or a hierarchy. And I think in terms of how that translates into work in the real estate sector, real estate has inherently been designated zones for individual organizations who manage under a pyramid. It could be that in the future, if we go down a Patagonia route where I'm a neuropsychologist and I'm interested in how we design chairs. Why do I work for Cushman & Wakefield? I could also just be a specialist in my field, and then I could connect with Steelcases and the Aarons of the world. Researchers could come and talk to me. We could form a group around a content-specific issue, as opposed to sitting in kind of departmental hierarchies. The implication is that we move to a highly flex solution. In a way, we become an industry of edge workspaces where I show up and I kind of put my sign up for the day and say, hey, I'm interested in organizational network analysis today. Who wants to come and talk to me? So I think the reason why it's so complex to solve is because it's a complex problem. There's so many dynamics attached to it that measurement for me is the next step to
and I think one of the things that we're really going to put a lot of focus on in the building revolution and have specific events and specific initiatives is that complex stakeholder map, right? It used to be that an owner of a building would lease it out to one tenant and that one tenant would manage their pyramid within that space. But that's changing, and it's actually forcing those building owners to separate from that vision and come up with their own vision for the building and how it's used. And so that's really fascinating. And of course, that's only one example on this massive scale. But I think we need to look at the stakeholder map and why is it so difficult right now to make this useful, better, improved.
I like that analogy of the top-down pyramid management as opposed to Patagonia, where you have a bunch of diverse people, but they have a shared purpose, shared mission, and shared values, right? And I think it's similar when you talk about the building owners, tenants, stakeholders, right? They all have a shared value, right? They want to get the most out of the asset, out of the people. So how do you bring those shared values together in a shared purpose? And like you said, the edge workspaces, I'm in my tribe, I'm in my community, even if it's a different organization. So it's having that diversity even outside your organization and taking in the whole community in a shared purpose, shared vision, shared values.
Yeah, and different activities, different skill sets, they have a different physical phenotype. So if I want to hold a session on the future of kind of valuations for corporate buildings in the Zuidas, maybe the Zuidas is the best place for me to do that in a traditional kind of workplace environment. But if I'm, a highly creative marketing agency and I want to think about how do I start marketing X, Y, and Z to an undefined group, I need to be in a creative environment. Okay, then we can start to, if you like, separate real estate assets based on their ability to cultivate different types of states, which is what I'm interested in from a neurophysiological perspective, but even just from an experience perspective. Come to the Zuidas, this is really corporate. You want to go and do something creative and come up with the next marketing campaign, go and take a walk around the Veluwe. You don't need to come here. And if we start from an asset utilization perspective, categorizing real estate assets based on the experiences that they can offer, not necessarily have them wholly designated to organizations, well, I think we start to get towards a future paradigm of work.
Yeah, they're creating those experiences, right? With your shared community, whether it's marketing, financial services, whatever your core interests are.
It's a fascinating discussion. It's amazing. The building revolution is built up of real estate owners, of tech providers, of the Smart Building Collective, of researchers. So if you're interested in being a part of the discussion, if you're interested in joining as a speaker, of course, we'd love to have you as an audience member. But if you would like to contribute, just get in touch and we would love to have you be a part of this process.